Hej allihopa! Det här är min första video där jag pratar på svenska. På YouTube i alla fall. Min TikTok-konto har lite mer. Jag flyttade till Sverige från Japan i somras. Jag har pluggat svenska intensivt i ungefär 6 månader nu. Så jag ville prata lite om min svenska learning journey och dela med mig av tips till de som är intresserade av livet i Sverige och hur jag har lärt mig svenska hittills. Och det finns många alternativ till att lära sig svenska i Sverige. Exempelvis har vi SFI som är gratis, kurser på folkuniversitet, på nätet och så vidare. Och de flesta som flyttar till Sverige börjar med SFI, men jag tog en annan väg. Så jag ska prata lite om vad jag gjorde först. Jag tog 2 kurser på folkuniversitet i Stockholm de första 2 månaderna. Så jag började med A1 och sedan gjorde jag A2. Och vad är folkuniversitet för något? Låt mig förklara. So folkuniversitet is a private adult education school that can be found all over Sweden. They do, of course, do language courses, but they have other courses in different areas available as well. Efter A2 så berättade mina klasskompisar för mig att de tänkte byta till ett annat program som heter SIFA i Stockholm. SIFA stands for Swedish for Academics and Professionals. Så detta programmet är för de som bor i Stockholm och precis som SFI så är det gratis. Så jag bestämde mig för att byta också. Så jag tog ett prov och började med en 9 veckors kurs på SFI grundkurs 4. Men your mouse may vary här eftersom det är beroende på ens prestation på provet. Så jag började med SFI grundkurs 4, men mina klasskompisar började med SFI-D. Jag har fortsatt med SIFA och pluggar just nu SFI-1. Det är deltid. So one of the biggest questions that I usually get when I talk about my Swedish learning journey is why I chose to do folkuniversitet courses, which you have to pay for, instead of SFI, which I mentioned most people start with when they move to Sweden. I want to talk a little bit more in depth about the pros and cons of some of these programs that I just talked about in detail, so hence why we're switching back to English. Please do keep in mind that I have never personally studied at SFI, so everything that I'm telling you now is subjective opinion or from secondhand information. It's not something that I personally went through. And it is always best to do research to find things that fit your unique learning style or your unique situation. So please do take this as a grain of salt. So let's start with SFI. SFI stands for Swedish for Immigrants, and it is offered all throughout Sweden. It's a national free language program for immigrants to learn the fundamentals of Swedish. When I first came to Sweden and I learned that this program exists, I was so incredibly blown away by the fact that a country would go out of its way to provide language courses for immigrants. I mean, I wish they had this in Japan. I think it's such a brilliant investment and idea. It's available pretty much everywhere in Sweden because it is offered through your municipality. You apply and then you have to have a little bit of a wait time to join the program. It's also immersive. I heard that when you go to SFI from the first day, the teacher is already talking in Swedish to you. It may feel very scary and daunting at the time, and people have told me a lot about how the learning curve is really difficult, but over time you do get used to it, and I do think that one of the best ways you can learn quickly is to be immersed in the language, so I think that's great. Cons of SFI. So I have heard firsthand from my friends or friends of friends, so I guess secondhand information too, that SFI is really hit or miss. The quality of your education really truly depends on the teacher and also the group that you are studying with, and you have no choice in that. No cohort. People come and go very frequently in these classes, so there's a little bit lack of stability there. And if you're someone who is extremely motivated to learn, people have told me that it can feel a little bit distracting sometimes. You need a personal number or a samordningsnummer. You have to be someone who has moved to Sweden and for a longer term than, I believe, 1 year and 1 day. Otherwise, you cannot get this government-issued ID number and you can't sign up for SFI. Next, let's talk about folkuniversitet. Classes are structured and there's a cohort. Although there's no physical syllabus that the classes may follow, the teacher already has a very structured lesson plan that you will be able to follow. Especially for the first A1 and A2 classes that I did, I felt like there was a really good flow of grammar that we were learning through a textbook that people usually use. My classmates that I studied with were super motivated, very friendly too, but just very motivated to learn Swedish because you are paying to be there. People aren't kidding around, they like really want to learn. So I feel like that really helped me with my personal motivation and pushing myself too. Personally, I thought the quality of education was relatively high. Again, I only took 2 of the courses, but both teachers, although they were almost extremes of how they taught, I thought they did really well in explaining the grammar, and I feel like I learned a lot in the foundations. Anyone can join. So as I mentioned, for SFI, you need to be someone who moved here with a personal number or a samordningsnummer. But for this one, you don't. You can be anyone from anywhere. As long as you pay for the course, you can attend the courses. First and foremost, it is expensive. I did an intensive course twice. Classes from Monday through Friday in person for many hours a day. And that consisted for 4 weeks for 1 courses. So I did that times 2. Each intensive course that I took cost, I think, somewhere around 5,000 or 5,500 crowns. So it is absolutely not cheap. Pacing. Some people thought it was too fast. I personally thought it was too slow. The first A1 and A2 courses really heavily focused on grammar, which I argue that most people can learn by themselves if they want. But for many reasons, for example, perhaps because I already knew English, which makes learning Swedish much easier, I felt like I was a little bit ahead sometimes. Last but not least, let's talk about SIFA. I would say SIFA is kind of the happy middle between folk and SFI, and this is the program that I'm currently studying in now. So SIFA is a structured, cohort-free course that you can take. What's really cool about SIFA, that's I think very unique, is that they have a couple, not a lot, but a couple of different tracks for a little bit different fields of work and study. So for example, there's one for, I believe, economics, for people who are engineers, for people who are educators. Cons for SIFA. This program, as far as I know, is only offered in Stockholm. I'm not sure if other cities have an equivalent of it, so I would do my research and to see if that is the case. SIFA is also a only intensive class or course up until a certain level, which is SFA 1. On average, for a person who just starts out as a beginner, it takes maybe around 1 year to get to SFA 1 level. Once you reach SFA 1, it actually switches over to only distance and part-time. So currently I study at that level and I only have 1 lecture per week. This program also requires you to be living in Sweden and have a personal number. So going back to the question on why I chose to do folk courses, again, the pay courses over SFI, I would say it was ultimately down to a personal decision that was directly influenced by people that I knew around me. When I moved to Sweden, I was in it for the long haul. For me, I knew that I wanted to stay here mid to long term, so integrating and learning the language as effectively and as quickly as possible was something that I am prioritizing. With SFI, I have heard so many mixed reviews. Some people who had an amazing experience, and then also other people who said that they felt like they didn't get much out of it, even though they had studied there for months or even for years. People who study at SFI are so different, right? They're immigrants from all over the world with completely different backgrounds, education, language learning skills. They felt really alone, like they didn't get much guidance because the teacher has to cater to everyone. So for me, when I heard some of these things that could potentially go wrong, even though it is a great program and I probably would have done it if I didn't know about the other alternatives, I choose to do folk because I had the money and time to invest into my education. I did not want to gamble with the quality of education. I said, if I can pay to know that I am taking a good course, I will do it. Now let's wrap up this video by talking about who would I recommend for SFI, for folk, for SIFA. For SFI, I would recommend it to people who move to Sweden and want a low-risk way to start learning Swedish. I would argue that going to class with other people who are trying to learn Swedish is much better than studying by yourself at home. However, again, this really depends on your own learning preference and style. Some people really do work better by themselves, and some people thought that SFI requires you to do more at home anyway rather than a lot in class. But regardless, it is a really great entryway into learning Swedish if you're living in Sweden with a personal number. Who would I recommend for folkuniversitet? People who can afford to invest in their education for a structured cohort course. One person that I met was taking a studying vacation. He was from the UK and he came to Sweden specifically to learn Swedish for like 2 to 3 weeks. And again, anyone who pays can attend this class. So even though he didn't live there, he was able to take these classes, which I thought was really cool. Lastly, for SIFA, again, I recommend for those who are living in Stockholm because it's only available here. For those who have moved to Sweden and know they'll stay for a medium to long-term time and have the time to invest in an intensive education. Several hours per week, which means that most likely you are not working a full-time job. If you are, for example, job hunting like me right now, this is a really great opportunity for you to take full advantage of all this free time that you have to invest into learning Swedish by doing this type of course. So these were just 3 alternatives in learning Swedish while living in Sweden. And there's also other programs that I definitely don't know about. So my number 1 recommendation is talk to people. Talk to any connection that you have who may have done this before and ask for their recommendation in your area. Your learning style is so unique from everybody else's. What works for me may not work for you. So do your own research and do your own due diligence, and I'm sure you will have a great time, a great opportunity learning Swedish. Tack så mycket för att ni lyssnade idag. If you want a more detailed video on tips on how I actually learned Swedish and learned to speak it too, please let me know in the comments. I'm happy to elaborate and make a separate video on that. Thanks so much for joining today. Hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to follow me on my Sweden journey and making it home. Hej då!